Hello and welcome back to the second episode of Bera Basics. So a while ago I did a video on what are the most basic items that you need to have in order to start cooking. How do you first build up your kitchen after you move out of your parents' home, or after you get a place on your own when it was your other roommates that had all the kitchen items. And we covered the basics of how to select your knife and what other items you need, what types of pots and pans, and it was all very simple. It was a handful of items. So this is going to be a video on how to expand your kitchen once you have those basic items and after you've been cooking for a little bit. So, to start off, as I said, you start with a knife when you're looking at your basic kitchen. And when you're expanding your kitchen, you kind of return to talking about your knife. In this case, if you bought a mid-range knife the first time, which was one of the options and one that I kind of recommended, when you start to expand, that's when you start going for more expensive and really nice knives. That's one of the options. So if you go for a really nice knife, you want it to be a extremely good quality steel. This one is in fact a super steel knife. And the really cool thing about this particular knife is it has the various elements that are alloyed into the knife listed on the side of the blade in their concentration in this knife. Oh, there's a little bit of a scuff. I'll have to just go over that. It's a couple of my fingerprints. But you want to get a nicer knife if you decide to go for this particular route. And for that, get a knife that feels really lively in your hand. So the length depends on the size of your hands. I have everything from I want to say 7-inch chef's knife all the way out to about a 12-inch chef's knife. And I have a 10-inch butcher knife. All of those can feel fairly good in my hand. I tend to go for a bit of the longer knives, but this one I think is an 8-inch. And it, just due to how it's made, it feels really damn good in my hand. So there's a couple different ways that you want to make sure that it feels good. The number of times that you just do a hammer grip like this when chopping, very few. So you want to actually maneuver it around and use it in various grips that you'll actually be using in the kitchen to see how it fits in your hand. This is where some specialty kitchen stores really excel, because some of those allow you to get your hands on the knives that you're dealing with. Others, they are less willing to allow you to have access. So if you have the ability, go to one of the nicer ones that allows you to actually feel the knife. And like I said, you want to try it in a variety of grips. The hammer grip, kind of choking down on it. A blade grip, that's fairly common in the kitchen, especially if you're doing any fine work. You definitely want to choke down on to the actual blade rather than just using the handle. So actually maneuver it around, see how it feels in your hand. That's going to be one option. So one option is, if you went for the mid-range knife, then go for a higher grade knife. Artisan Revere is the brand that this knife is from. I definitely recommend it. It feels amazing. It's an absolutely beautiful knife. And any marks, like I said, that's just finger marks from me maneuvering the blade right now and a little bit of just hard water, so I'm just going to brush this down with a bit of vinegar to remove that and then really pat it dry. It is a stainless super steel, which is really nice. It makes this knife fairly durable, but since it's a super steel, it kind of has the advantages of a high carbon steel while also having some of the stainless properties, which it's absolutely beautiful. Another option, rather than going for one really good knife, is this is when you can start to look at sets of knives. The thing about sets of knives is that their quality typically falls below individual knives. But what you don't get in the high-end quality of an individual knife, you make up for by the utility of them, by the selection of knives that you have. So you get not just a chef's knife or a santoku, but you get a paring knife, which is really light and very fluid in the hand. In my particular set, I got a barreling knife, which isn't used in household cooking all that much, but it can be kind of fun if you want to do a bit of an old presentation of potatoes and you want to barrel the potatoes. And you get just a wide variety of knives. You get bread knives, you get stuff like that. Also, mine came with a rather nice sharpening steel. And again, just like knives, there are different grades of sharpening steel. So this is another area that I recommended you get a good one. But if you went for mid-range, when you start to expand, go for a better sharpening steel. So that covers the most basic part of the upgrade. Your cutlery, your knives. Again, if you went for high-end, then go for variety, get a block. Or start buying individual different types of knives. So I have a fair selection here. In fact, let me grab a couple of those because I got a couple new ones recently. Last time when I did my video, I mentioned a Chinese chef's knife, but I did not have a Chinese chef's knife to hand. I recently acquired a Chinese chef's knife, and I'll grab a couple of my knives that I've shown off before as well, just so I can talk about the different varieties of knives again. And let me grab a santoku. Let's see, so Chinese chef's knife, butcher knife, a long blade chef's, a santoku, Chinese, butcher, that's my longest blade chef, santoku, and we'll pull out the cleaver again. So, as I said, the Chinese chef's knife, which this is a good example of, looks rather similar to a cleaver, but this is a standard all-purpose cleaver. It has a different type of blade shape, as you can see. It's not just the size, but also just the overall shape. The Chinese chef's knife is a bit more squared off than even a cleaver. This is a fantastic knife, and again, if one way that you can select what you get is match your kitchenware to your cooking style. That's something that I always recommend. So if you do a lot more Chinese cooking than you do European cooking, rather than going for a standard European chef's knife, go for the Chinese chef's knife. They are beautifully done, where just like everything else. You can find really good versions, you can find rather poorly done versions, but if you get a good one, they're absolutely fantastic. They have a different feel in the hand, of course, because they have a much heavier blade, much larger blade. So this one is again something that you would end up choking up on the blade a lot more often than you would for a European chef's knife, but it works beautifully, it slices well. This is a fairly good quality one. Then I mentioned the Japanese chef's knife, the Santoku, and again, it's just as good as a normal chef's knife, as a European chef's knife. So this is another option. If you do a lot of Japanese cooking, go for a Santoku rather than a European. And European chef's knives, and really any type of knife, comes in a lot of different sizes. So this is a full 12-inch chef's knife. This does not feel good in the hand to most people. I have, again, rather meaty big hands. So this still feels really nice when I'm using it. And I can use it in the hammer grip. I can choke down on it fairly easy. It feels lively despite its size. So you can go for a step up in knife quality. You can go for additional types of knives, going for not just a European, but a Chinese chef's knife, or a Japanese chef's knife, a Santoku. You can also go for the utility option, but go for individual utility, which again, you can get a bit higher quality than you would in a standard knife block normally. Some knife blocks are rather high quality. The bulk of them, they're a bit lower than individual. So, if you want to talk utility, then that's getting entirely different shapes of knives. So, for example, this is a butcher's knife. And it's designed to be very nice as you butcher up a chicken or any piece of meat, really. So, if you find yourself buying large quantities of meat and then cutting them down to size, getting a butcher's knife is probably a good option. And there's a lot of really high quality ones. This one is a Wusthof Pro. Absolutely beautiful knife. I definitely recommend this one. It is a 10-inch butcher's knife. Makes going through chicken and breaking it down really easy. You can do it with a chef's knife, just this makes it a bit easier. And also makes going through large roasts that I'm sectioning up for individual meals really nice. Beautiful cutter. So this is one option. Go for different types of knives, and this one is again a butcher's knife, which is just designed for breaking down large hunks of meat. Another option as an individual is this one. Again, got a little bit of dust and grease on the blade. This is just my standard or universal cleaver. It's not as heavy as a meat cleaver. It's a bit heavier than a vegetable cleaver. This is just a good all-purpose. And again, it feels different, kind of like the Chinese chef's knife. It's heavier, so it chops really nicely, but it can still slice, it can still do some rather beautiful cuts with it. And having this is nice because, again, I'm breaking down woodier vegetables, the potatoes, the carrots, heavy starches, stuff like that. This knife goes through them rather easily because it has a fair bit of chop. And also when I'm going through heavy pieces of meat, this can do fairly well, just like the butcher's knife does. It doesn't go quite as nicely through, but it still does a damn good job. And if I'm trying to go through quick, I'll reach for this rather than this. If I'm trying to go through nice, I'll go for the butcher. So, you can either go for quality upgrade or variety. Either way works, and you can do a bit of mix and match. You can get knife blocks, you can get some individuals. It all depends on how much you're planning on expanding, but that's really how you decide where you want to expand. Do you have a specific type of knife that you want, or do you want to upgrade? Do you just want variety? Go for that. So let me get these out of the way, and we'll start talking about larger purchases, or not necessarily larger, but different types of kitchen purchases and upgrades once these are back where they belong. So, when I was talking about this last time, I talked about cookware. I recommended cast iron because I am a bit of a cast iron fiend. And the same thing goes for cast iron that went for, or really any type of cookware, as went for the knives. You have a couple different options. You can upgrade in quality, or you can upgrade in utility. So, I have a wide variety of different cast irons. I have Dutch ovens, I have skillets, I have circular skillets, I have a square skillet. This one's my oldest bit of cast iron. This one's actually a bit of cast iron that was passed down from my grandparents to me. When I first got it, it was in fairly rough shape because it had been stored in a basement just when it reached the point where it got a bit too heavy for my grandma to consistently use. Got bumped down there, so I went over it, scoured off all the rust, re-seasoned it, and it is a beauty of a cast iron pan. It has a smooth bottom because it is a finished cast iron pan. The little bit of texture issue is just, it has been used fairly often, so it doesn't have a quite uniform coat, and there's a little bit of stuff that I should probably go back in and scrub a bit more, but it's a beautiful, beautiful skillet. So you can go for different types of skillets, different sizes of skillets, different qualities. If you didn't buy a cast iron, you just bought the stainless steel or a different type of pan, you can go for cast iron. If you bought more cast iron than you did the other sorts, go for that. And that's all, again, a preference thing. If you prefer the cast iron, get more cast iron. If you prefer the non-cast iron because cast iron's a bit too heavy, then go for non-cast iron. A lot of this is going to be your personal preference, because when it comes to cooking, your cooking style has a massive influence on what you want to get and when you want to get it. So, the next few items are going to be a bit weirder. So, one thing that if you don't want to just be beating everything by hand, or you need a blender option, one fantastic option is going for an immersion blender rather than a standard full blender. And also, I'm cooking for one person, so the blender that I'm going to mention is not a standard size blender. Anyways, so the beauty about an immersion blender is it tends to come with a number of different attachments. This one can be a whisk. It can be a immersion blender. This is also ridiculously easy to clean, because the only part that really comes in contact with food are these attachments. And they're designed to spin, at high rates of speed. So get hot water, mix in soap, flick it on full whack, just go straight down into the hot soapy water, let it mix about, dunk it up and down a couple times, pull it out, dump out your water, switch to just hot rinsing water, go up and down a few times at full whack, and it pretty much cleans itself. It's absolutely beautiful that way. It has a bunch of different abilities. It can be a whisk, it can be a blender. I have a mini chopper that attaches to this thing as well, and there's a number of other attachments. So this is a really good option. Has a lot of utility. You can blend sauces right in the pan that you're cooking them in, because this is metal mostly. It's a high temperature resistant blender. You can blend small things, you can blend large things, you can whisk up amazing whipped cream without having to do it all by hand. So this is a really good option for just its utility in the kitchen. I recommend this more than a standing blender just because it has more uses than a standing blender. A standing blender has its place, but it's not really all that needed. So, keeping on the theme of blenders, the blender that I use most often, and this is mainly because I'm cooking for one, is I just have a little magic bullet. They're nice, they do a good job. I do a lot of my marinades in the magic bullet because it makes it really easy just to get in a nice homogenized mixture. And the cups aren't terribly large. They are about that big to, there's some long ones that you can get. So it's good for a single serve, single use. It is just a beautiful little bit of gadgetry. You can also go for food processors. I have one which I forgot to grab down and put near me, but I use the food processor at times. It again has a fair bit of utility, from a blade that shreds cheese really well, a grating blade rather, to the normal chopping blade, to dough blade. It has a bunch of different uses. And I try to stick away from single-use kitchen gadgets, but every now and then, some things are worth the single use. So, if you're trying to cook for your family, or you don't have that much time to putz around in the kitchen, a slow cooker, really good option. You can whack your ingredients into a slow cooker, turn it on, and let it go all day. I have one of those. In fact, I have more than one of those. I think I have 3 or 4 different slow cookers. But that's because I've acquired them at various times, and I cook a lot. You don't need anywhere near that number most of the time. And then one thing, I'm just going to show the box for this because I have it hooked up. I use it a lot, and I don't want to go about unhooking it and then having to deal with that, is an Instant Pot. This is a beautiful, beautiful device that is not a single-use device by any stretch of the imagination. The one that I got is able to pressure cook. It's able to make yogurt, to steam, to make rice, to saute, to slow cook. It has a bunch of different settings that I can select between. So this is a fantastic option as well. And again, this speeds up a lot of things. The pressure cooker just gets it done beautifully. It takes the place of a rice cooker, though. Rice cooker is another single-use gadget that I still fairly well recommend. This is like a rice cooker, but a bit more useful. So, I do recommend things like this. There's a number of different options. Instapot's just one of the companies. You have the Ninja Foodie is another version of this. A number of companies have come out. They're all rather good. You can look at the reviews. Some of them are more highly reviewed than others. So, if you do decide to go for one, look up what everyone else is saying about it. See which one fits your style a bit more. And they come in different sizes, so if it's for personal use, go for a smaller one. If it's for family use, go for a larger one. And depending on the size of your family, just keep on scaling up. A lot of what you want to get, though, is determined by your cooking style, as I said. So, if you don't steam anything, there's no need to get a steamer. Absolutely no need to get a steamer. If you like steaming food, if you like to make baozi and jiaozi, then you want to get a steamer. And there's a couple different options, and I have two of them to hand. I have a bamboo steamer. Here, let me just grab it down and show you guys what I'm talking about. Because I'm willing to bet some people haven't seen a bamboo steamer or been near a bamboo steamer before. So let me grab this down. This one has been with me for a fair while. So I have this beautiful bamboo steamer. Bamboo is somewhat naturally antibiotic and antiviral. It traps a lot of nasty things when you're cooking, so it is easy to maintain and it's food safe. These are absolutely amazing. I make jiaozi in these. This one is not really set up to make baozi, just because the size of the steamer and the size of the baozi that I tend to make. When I make baozi, I make good size baozi. And these are about an inch deep. About an inch and a half, I guess, deep. Plus a little bit more on the lid, so probably 2 inches. Maybe a bit more. Probably a bit more. I'm terrible at measuring sizes compared to my hands because my hands are weirdly sized. But, yeah, probably about 2 inches, maybe a bit more deep, plus a little bit more on this side. But my baozi tend to steam up a bit bigger than this, so I have a big metal steamer that I use for my baozi. But when I'm doing jiaozi, I tend to use my bamboo steamer. These are fantastic. They're fairly easy to maintain. They're fairly easy to deal with. If you're really worried that they aren't clean enough, then you can go for a metal one. If you're worried that yours might have something bad, boil water and vinegar and set it on top for a good while. Just let that steam up through. That'll kill pretty much everything that can actually grow on these, which again is not that much. I have accidentally scorched this a little bit. That can sometimes happen. Just make sure that there's still liquid in the pot, and the chance of scorching it goes down drastically. These are fantastic. I recommend them if it fits the size of what you're steaming, and if you plan on steaming a lot. If you don't need one of these. And the same goes for the metal steamer. What I do recommend everyone kind of has around is just one of those overpot steamers that you get with a lot of options of buying pots in bulk. So I just have a small steamer for like steaming broccoli or peas, stuff like that, that just came with one of the pots that I own. And I'll use that for a fair bit of what I steam, if it's just, again, steaming some peas for dinner, steaming some broccoli, steaming any sort of veg. That's just easier than busting out my bamboo steamer, but I still use the bamboo steamer a fair bit. Let's see, is there anything? I think that covers the bulk of what I would suggest. Oh, and then, of course, if you want to make waffles, get a waffle iron. If you find yourself baking a lot, get more bakeware. Get more loaf pans. Get more glass or Pyrex ware. Baking dishes. Get a springform cake pan. Here, I'll bust out one of those so I can show people how those work. I prefer my springform to my non-springform cake pans because they're a hell of a lot easier to get the cake out of. I'll just grab down one. I have 2 or 3 of these, if I remember correctly. So, these are absolutely beautiful because when it's strapped down like this, the sides on the bottom, pour in whatever you want here, and it won't seep through the cracks. It'll stay right there. You grease this just like you would any other cake pan. But then at the end of it, rather than having to very carefully cut around the side, make sure that you use a lot of baking paper on the side, you can just undo the spring, pull off the side, and then your cake's just sitting here. Normally you use some baking paper on this, or just grease it really well. It's easy to remove, whereas a normal one, you kind of fight with the side a little bit. Springforms just make that easy. So if you bake a lot, get a springform. Works amazingly. Absolutely beautiful construction. Really well done. This is a USA Pan springform. I recommend it. I used it in my Irish car bomb cake video. Goes absolutely beautiful. If you make a lot of tea and coffee, get an electric kettle. Because if you use a standard kettle takes the water up to boiling, causes the whistle, you realize that it's whistling, you take it off the heat, and then most teas, you don't want at boiling. You want to let the water cool, so then you walk away from your kettle, and the water cools, and most of the time, or some of the time, you'll remember that you're letting the water cool. You'll go back and pour yourself up a nice cup of tea. Sometimes you forget, the water becomes cold, and you have to boil for a cup of tea again, and go through that process again. An electric kettle doesn't quite take it up to boiling. It's a bit below boiling. It's at the perfect tea temp normally. So you can make your tea right away. You can get a coffee maker, just not put in the coffee and the filter paper in top, and do it that way. I have a little coffee carafe. I never make coffee. I just use it for tea. And that goes beautifully as well, because it's the same thing as an electric kettle. So I recommend both of those. And again, all of this is determined by how you cook and what you cook. Because most cookware, the stuff that I mentioned in the first video, as I said then, can do 90+% of all your cooking. If you find out that you need a bigger pot while cooking with it, go out, get a bigger pot. If you find that you need a smaller pot. Go out, get a smaller pot. One thing that I have is I have what's called an asparagus pot or a pasta pot, which makes single-serve pasta a lot easier. So if you're cooking for just yourself, get a pasta pot. Works nice, doesn't boil as much water, so it's a lot easier to size out your food. But yeah, that covers most of the first expansion of your kitchen, and what I would recommend getting and why I would recommend getting it. Oh, I forgot one thing, I suppose, and that is if you're cooking for a large family or a holiday meal especially, and you find that the Dutch oven that I recommended or the similarly sized pan doesn't have enough room, one thing that you can get, and if you get one of these, I recommend looking online and seeing what is the best version at the time, is you can get a full roasting pan. When I got mine, I looked to see what was the top rated one from America's Test Kitchen, which is a fantastic source for looking at what you want to get. They do a lot of ratings on a lot of different things. So this was the particular roasting pan that they most recommended. It is an absolute beauty and a brute. I can fit anything that I want to roast in here in rather easily. Whole turkeys of rather sizable poundage, geese, ducks, chickens, of course. Anything that I desire to roast, big beef roast, all fit nicely on this. It comes with a metal trivet to hold everything up, or you can remove the metal trivet and just do a normal veg and starch trivet in the bottom. What I mean by that is slice up carrots and onions and potatoes and throw in some mushrooms, whatever you want to roast up with. Just throw that in the bottom and then place your meat on top of that. And that becomes the trivet. It just raises it up a little bit off the bottom so that it isn't going to burn the bottom. Also, this is amazing for crisping up potatoes, for oven roasted potatoes. This is just a beautiful bit of cookware. It isn't always needed because, again, this thing is massive, which, when I'm cooking for myself, I'll bust it out occasionally for some oven roasted potatoes or something like that, but a good chunk of the time, this is more of I'm cooking for a party or anything of that like. But if you have a large family, this is probably a good investment for a first real expansion of the kitchen. But other than that, I think I've covered all the basics. Should be. Again, it's a bit of a as-you-go process. When you notice you need something, when you notice that I got a good knife, but I didn't get the best knife, get a better knife. If you go, yeah, this knife works for this, but there's a better knife than that, have at it. Go for that new type of knife. Go for that new variety. Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention in terms of knives is different knives have different grind angles and styles. So, for example, the chef's knife, the normal European chef's knife, has a uniform two-sided grind, and it tends to be a couple degrees more, or a couple degrees wider than a Japanese style grind. So, a Japanese knife, you'll need to sharpen a little bit more in order to maintain its edge than you will a European chef's knife. But both of them work Here, let me see if I can get close enough to the camera and get enough light on the edge to kind of show what I'm talking about. Let's see. You can kind of see what I'm talking about there. So, what I mean by it has a two-sided grind, it is ground to the center point as much on this side as it is on this side. And it has two bevels. It has the primary bevel, and it has a secondary bevel. The secondary bevel kind of smooths out the severity of the angle from the flat of the blade. The primary is what actually puts the edge on it. So let's see. There we go. That's a bit easier way of showing it. Just need to get it to focus right. There we go. I had it for a second there. Come on. This camera does not want to catch what I'm trying to show. Let me move up more. And be very careful when your hand's towards the blade end of a knife. I am making sure that I move my hand away from the blade before I move it up and down the blade, rather than just going straight up and down, because that, especially with this knife, would slice my hand wide open. Let me see if I can fix the focus on this a little bit. Get it to focus on exactly the point that I want it to. My hands, I'm okay with them going a bit blurry. I just need to get the right focus point. Okay, so there we go. You can see it a little bit better there. See how it angles twice in the grind. You have the first angle, and then it kind of smooths out onto the flat with a second angle. That's the primary and secondary bevel. And on a European knife, those are done at the same angle from the left and right side of the blade. On a Japanese knife, you'll find some of them are a chisel grind, which means that just like this wood chisel that I have here, which I can show from the side rather easily, it's just one side is ground down towards the other side doesn't get ground at all, which does have certain advantages. It does have certain disadvantages. Some Japanese knives, especially Japanese vegetable knives, have a chisel grind. That's all effectively a matter of how you like using your knife, so just bear that in mind when you're getting knives, because if you just have a little knife sharpening system like this, don't use a chisel ground knife through this. Don't run it through. It'll ruin the grind. You'll need to get a different type of sharpening system, or just get a whetstone or a water stone and grind that one side so that it works. That was really the last thing that I can think of. So I'll leave off there. This video is already a bit too long. But there's my suggestions on how to expand your kitchen. Hopefully this was informative and helped some people out. Do let me know in the comments below. And I'll leave off with my standard of try something new, enjoy your food, enjoy your life, and think about how you cook and what could help you cook a bit better. And that's really what you would go for when you expand your kitchen. With that, have a good one all.